Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Thursday the 26th of February. We're late, but we're late for a very good reason, and we'll tell you what that reason is in a minute once we've thought of it. Joining me on this edition, Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
He bragged that he killed 12 men, not including Indians and Chinamen.
Nice one, Clarkson.
Games Editor Mark Botwright.
I done shot that horse.
And Audio Reviewer Edward Selley.
No wonder the circuit failed. It says made in Japan.
So, we are late because we were at the Panasonic European Convention. We're going to talk about that in a little while because before that we have some competitions to go through. And Ed, I believe it's your turn to tell us all about it.
Oh, goody. Right, okay. You can win, finishing imminently, is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy on Blu-ray. Splendid film. I'm assuming that's the newer one, not the original. It is, isn't it? It's the actual more recent film. All jolly good. And most entertaining. Then there's the Babadook, also finishing at the end of the month. Now, I haven't the faintest idea what it is. I keep thinking it reminiscent of Crash Bandicoot, but I'm assuming it has absolutely nothing to do with that at all. But you can win it anyway, and you should definitely try. Willow, 3rd of March. I haven't watched that since I was about 9, but you know it's all right. Why not? Go for it. Mad Max Collection. Now that's a bit more like it. Watch Mad Max 1 and Mad Max 2. As I say, just use Thunderdome as a drinks coaster. It's got you covered. And then, rather splendidly, this has popped up. I think this is a new one. There is a competition to win the Sound Magic P30S headphones that I reviewed recently. Now, I thought they were pretty damn good value at 70 quid. So they are, frankly, unbelievably astonishing value at free. And if you don't enter that competition, there's something seriously wrong with you.
Right, so let's move on and let's go to Bristol, where I believe there was a small sound and vision, now the small vision part and big sound part, Edward. Now, obviously I need to stress that from my position, I'm not bothered about there being small vision, but I have seen various comments from a number of disappointed parties. Bristol has always been a balancing act, and I don't think there's any point denying that the balance has firmly been on the side of audio for the last half a decade, but there are reasons for that. I mean, it's a dealer-driven show, and vision is something that's predominantly handled by, larger retailers who aren't exhibiting there. So audio is always going to take a front seat. With that in mind, I was pretty happy with what I saw. I think for me the most positive point of Bristol this year is that there was a lot more interesting product at what I would describe as roughly sensible money. Don't get me wrong, there are still some phenomenally expensive things there, but if you've looked at my show report, and if you haven't, then what the hell's wrong with you? If you look at the show report, there's plenty of things at what I would describe as discretional spending levels, and I think that's something that has been absent the last couple of years, and I think was quite positive. Right, so let's talk about vision first of all, and then we can move on to all the fabulous things that Ed has seen and likes audio-wise, because I have no doubt there is some quality audio equipment. I think anybody that goes to the show expecting it to be heavy on vision side of things, Steve, is going to be, pretty saddened, especially when well-known companies who have done dark room demos in the past to show off their kit suddenly turn it into a living room environment, which I think has annoyed a couple of people on the forums at least.
Yeah, it has. Although I think they're probably perhaps missing the point of the stand this year. In the past, JVC certainly have always done dark room demos with the latest range of projectors. Now, obviously, of course, there was no new range at the end of last year. We're still on the previous year's range. So that what they'd done instead this year was to create a fake living room environment to show you that the X500 is bright enough to be used in an environment like that and not just in a dark room. Obviously, if you want to take advantage of the really great blacks on that projector, you need to use it in a really dark room. But it is bright enough to be used in a room with more ambient light, and that's the point they were trying to make. And I think when people start talking about, was it set up correctly, all the demo material and sort of stuff, I mean, that wasn't really the point of that. That projector was demoed last year with a dark room. This year they were just trying to create something a bit different in this sort of year when they don't have a new lineup to show off. And I think also it gives a chance for people to come and drop in to the stand and chat to the guys and get more footfall, because obviously the thing about demos is people queue up, they get their ticket, they go in, they do it, they leave. And I think JVC felt they could probably talk to consumers more and visitors to the show more if they had it set up that way, where people would just pass through every now and then whenever they felt like it. And apparently, according to JVC, that was quite successful. So I can understand why some people might have been disappointed, but that was why they did it, and makes sense to me. I think generally, though, if you're a Vision fan, the show's become increasingly disappointing over the last few years. I mean, there was a time when you could go and see the new projectors from Sim, and Sony would have a projector set up, and there'd be JVC and Epson and Optoma.
It was always a highlight of the show for me was Alan Roser's demos. I mean, the extortionate money. I mean, you're talking.
He always started with the same line, didn't he? He was like, you can't afford this.
Yeah.
But this is what we're showing.
Yeah, but that's what you want to see when you go to a show like that. When you're paying like 10 quid for a ticket, you want to be entertained. You want to see stuff that you wouldn't normally see anywhere else. And that was always the feeling I took away from the show, especially with Alan Roser's demos and similar demos like that. I mean, I remember big demos from Kef in the past where they had double stacked CRT projectors.
Yeah, no, it is disappointing. You don't really get that anymore. Sim were only there. Well, Sim weren't there in that aspect. I mean, it was other companies like Anthem and Paradigm who were distributed by the same company in the UK as Sim 2, and they were showing audio products. Epson had some of their projectors there, but very disappointingly, did not have the LS10000. There's a projector for anyone to see, which you thought would have been the obvious place. Apparently, that's because it isn't going to be stopped by the retailer that actually puts the show on, and that's why it wasn't there. But that's a real disappointment for me. I was hoping I might get a chance to get a look at it at last, and I'm sure a lot of other people going to the show were thinking the same thing. Optoma had their current lineup, which we'd already reviewed, and nothing particularly new there, unfortunately, although they were obviously pushing a lot of audio products that they've got now. JVC were doing the demo with the X500, and I think that was about it as far as projectors go. There really was very, very little in terms of. In fact, the best projector demo, if you like, that I saw was actually the Pioneer Atmos demo, where they were using an X500 in there, and that looked really good. But that obviously was more about demoing Atmos, and not. It just happened to be that they were using an X500. But if it's Vision you're after, unfortunately, it really isn't. There isn't much of that at this show anymore. It's predominantly audio. At least, though, if you're an AV fan, Atmos sort of pushed AV back into the fore a bit, and multi-channel was again very evident for the first time. I mean, last year in particular, there was very little of that.
Yeah, but you got speaker. Cynical side of me. You got speaker manufacturers looking to shift speakers.
Absolutely,
Atmos is a godsend for them.
You got receiver manufacturers who finally got something new they can show. Because for the last, let's be honest, for the last 5 years, there hasn't really been much new in terms of AVRs, and suddenly having a new two new formats and a third one on around the corner has at least given them an opportunity to show off their wares again. And so we had Atmos demos from Kef, Onkyo, Yamaha, Pioneer, I think, Tannoy. And Tannoy actually did have overhead speakers on gantries.
That was Monitor Audio, wasn't it?
Oh, sorry, yes, you're right, Monitor Audio. Yeah, Monitor Audio, who actually had these sort of gantries of speakers above, as opposed to the other ones who were all using upward firing Dolby Atmos speakers. But, that at least meant that if you're an AV fan and a multi-channel fan, there was some new stuff to see. And I'm sure a lot of people haven't experienced Atmos yet. Certainly the home version, probably not even the cinema version, because there aren't that many Atmos cinemas in the country. And that's, like you said, Phil, one of the reasons for going to the show is to see things that perhaps you've never seen before or wouldn't get a chance to see, and that gives it a bit of fun. So I was glad to see that. And the Kef demo was good. I think they were doing 5.1.4. Yamaha were doing 7.1.4. Actually, I think 7.2.4, in fact. And then Pioneer were doing a 5.2.4, and Monitor Audio had a 5.2.2 set up, as did Onkyo. And obviously, most of the demo discs were either Transformers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so not the greatest of films. But I think people were generally impressed. Certainly, whilst there's lots of debate about the validity of the upward firing speakers, they do create a sensation of sound coming from above you. And in the case of Monitor Audio, there was genuinely sound coming from above you. And I think, for people that hadn't seen it before, had a chance to experience it, that was good.
I felt that there were more exhibits where something approaching real world was being attempted. And I think when it comes down to it, you have to bear in mind that the show is being done with a view to you then splashing your actual money in a physical premises or indeed at the show. So it's great if you turn up with something which costs as much as a Porsche Boxster, but it's unlikely that having done so, you are going to achieve much directly as a result of that. And the halo effect we know it exists, but you don't. It's not something that you can really quantify or sort of expect great things from. So I think the show is ultimately pragmatic, and as a result of that, what you see is what you get. And I mean, to be honest, I thought it was quite a good spread of stuff, but that's because I guess I'm much more of a 2-channel person than a multi-channel person.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of mood of the show, obviously there was a real feel-good factor coming off the back of CES. Steve, was that momentum there at Bristol?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was. It looked like the show was pretty busy compared to a couple of previous years where I think it had been a bit quiet. I think there was a bit of excitement and a bit more energy to it than I'd seen in previous years. And I think that's probably because in general, I think the economy is on the up a bit, and certainly the CE industry seems to be up a lot more this year. I guess because there is more coming in terms of new product and new technologies, and certainly that was reflected in the Bristol show, in my opinion. Do you think that, Ed?
Yeah, I felt that manufacturers are reasonably confident that good product is finding homes, and it must be said that there was a reasonable selection of good product, to sort of fuel that demand. Consumers, they're far more likely to do significant research before they step into a store, and they do have much higher aspirations of what sensibly priced equipment should be built like, look like, and actually do. But more often than not, manufacturers are delivering on that surprisingly well. And at the end of the day, God, I sound like a football pundit. At the end of the day, when it comes down to it, there is, stereo has sort of come in from the cold a bit, and I think it was sort of a tribute to that there were products that were different shapes, different functions, but ultimately celebrating stereo, and there were lots of them, and I think that's in many regards what's finding homes, not speakers in the ceiling.
Yeah, I think speakers in the ceiling is never going to achieve mass market appeal for the obvious reason. So it very much comes down to how effective the Dolby Atmos speakers are, as to whether that particular format's going to gain any traction.
And if anybody is actually interested, because quite a few comments were, yeah, it was all right, but I wouldn't buy it. And we can only go in the comments, it's on the forums, but that was certainly the feeling I got was, yeah, it was okay, but it was nothing outstanding, or I wouldn't buy it.
There needs to be a really significant tranche of films as well. I mean, it's a cold hard realization. I mean, obviously, Expendables, even in its reduced certificate status that it is in Expendables 3, you can't easily use that as a demonstration at a public show. So that places heavy reliance on Transformers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which just serves to remind you that at the moment Atmos is being used as a filler to get a particular group of people to buy a disc that otherwise they probably wouldn't bother with, because it's nothing to do with the quality of the film.
You cynical man, you.
Well, it's this is nothing new, but Atmos places it in starkest relief because of just the incredibly slow rate at which the releases are coming out, and there's still nothing that has me going, yes, do you know what? It's time to put the effort in.
I know what you're saying. I watched Gravity at the weekend on these speakers that I've got in at the minute from XTZ, and obviously doing a tonality check between all the speakers to make sure that it's enveloping. Oh, fantastic! I didn't need Atmos for that. The voices, the sounds, they were all around, and there felt like a separation in height as well. And when you got a decent setup and a decent speaker system, and it's all plumbed in correctly, do you really need the extra speakers, Steve?
No, do you need them? No, of course you don't need them. I think it's going to come down to the content. I watched a film called John Wick on Sunday, a US disc with Atmos soundtrack. The film doesn't actually open up in the UK until April. But it was a really good film. I really enjoyed it. Action-packed. Keanu Reeves was the star. He was very good in it. And it had I thought, a really good Atmos mix where they used the additional overhead channels, creatively. And the problem, I think, is that at the moment there's been a lot of sound designers have been using them, because they're there. So let's lob a few sounds above us and this sort of stuff. Whereas what you really want to do is just use it when it's necessary and when it makes sense within the story. And then it can be effective. Things like helicopter flyovers, that sort of stuff, very immersive. But also there was lots of shootouts in enclosed spaces. So there was echoes around you and above you as the gunfire went off. And there was a scene where there was a big fight in a disco, a nightclub. And again, the sound music was coming from above, because in a nightclub, that's where the speakers would be, and that kind of really gave the sensation you were in this club with them. So it can be, I think, when used effectively and creatively, it can be good. Do you need it? No, of course you don't need it. But if you can get away with putting speakers on the ceiling, then why not?
Okay, let's move away from AV, the Vision, and Dolby Atmos. Let's leave all that behind. And Ed, what was your highlights of this show in terms of 2-channel Exotica and mainstream hi-fi?
Right, Exotica, tough one. Actually, a dealer had brought, which is a curious choice to come to the Bristol show when you are not part of the Audio T network. But a dealer I've actually visited in the past, based up all the way near Manchester, brought down an Accuphase and Tannoy system. Accuphase is, if you like, it's proper old school Japanese high end. They're all former Kenwood engineers, and all of their stuff is gold, and more often than not, it has wood on the sides. And it costs a lot of money, but it's built literally to survive the end of the world. And it was just a proper, big, immersive, meaty sound. And yeah, you wouldn't have got a lot of change from sort of 40, 50 grand for that. So probably that counts as my Exotica. The name, statement and focal demonstration, that was the same as last year. So it's not necessarily newsworthy, but as I said in the report, name is sort of relaxing a bit because they've now sold a couple of statements. And as a result, they played things like Rage Against the Machine and Kings of Leon, which, gives you a slightly more idea of what it can actually do.
Yeah,
and,
that's nice. That's nice to hear, because it's always handpicked, and it's always stuff that you've never heard before, so you've got no point of reference.
Yeah.
Or is jazz.
Absolutely. And so they were relaxing. And as I say in the report, hopefully they'll do Firestarter next year. And then last in terms of expensive, and this one has divided opinion, and it did unfortunately come down to what they were playing at the time. But Spender, the British loudspeaker company, had 3 rooms, 2 of which had Devialet amplification / decoding, because they're all one box. And they had the Spender Classics, which literally looked like they fell out of a hole in time from 1974, with this absolutely state-of-the-art Devialet amplifier. And when I went in there, they were playing Jeff Beck's slightly peculiar concept album from a couple of years ago, and it sounded mighty. Seriously good. I understand that other people since then went back and it was doing, Woman with Guitar volume 974, and that just doesn't give the same sort of excitement. But that was just a very cool system, because it's a really nice combination of sort of retro and modern, and was very cool. Then Back on Earth, insensibly priced. Actually, the room that won Sound of the Show, awarded by Clarity, was belonged to Henley Designs, and they had what are you laughing at?
Sounds of the Show by Clarity, so it was crystal clear.
Yes dear. That was actually the least expensive of the Henley rooms, and that was Acoustic Energy and some Project Electronics and turntable, and it was all set up on record and CD racks rather than on some enormously expensive dedicated rack, and sensible money, and it just sounded fun and engrossing and really, really entertaining. And that I thought that was heartening to see. And they weren't the only people doing that. Q Acoustics have got the new 3000 range. They always put on a good demonstration. I'm sure that Steve Reichert, if he listens, won't mind me saying that he's been doing this a while, and he knows how to get the best out of something. And that sounded really, really very good indeed. New Tannoy Revolutions, they are pretty sensible money, and also sounded mighty decent. They were playing some heavy dub when I went in there, and that's never a bad thing. There's always a degree of confidence as well when you're doing that in a hotel room. And then I suppose the other thing that wasn't playing, but I do really, really want to have a go on it, and pricing is unclear, but it's supposed to be cheap for the brand. In the Bowes & Wilkins room on the side is a new Class A 7.1 processor, and then there's stereo amp and a 5-channel amp, so you can either have a 5.1 or you can have stereo amp for the front channels, so on and so forth. It's quite slim. It's not as beautiful as some of the main Class A stuff, but it's still incredibly solidly put together. But it's a stereo optimized product with multi-channel support, and I think actually that could be pretty much the right product at the right time in terms of how these things are going. And I have left a begging note with Bowers and Wilkins that I want to get hold of that as soon as I humanly can. And if so, yeah, see if we can turn some copy around, because it looked really very promising indeed.
Excellent stuff. So anyway, that was the Bristol Sound and Vision show. There are 3 articles currently running on the site. They're all on the homepage. There is a 4-minute video. Go and check that out. It's the whole Bristol show in 4 minutes, which Steve put together, walking around the show with a camera, and some really interesting looking product in there. I was particularly interested in the cardinal shaped stand speakers from Wilson Benish. I thought they looked unusual. Don't know what the sound
seriously clever. They had a cutaway there, and you think, oh, that's a lot of money for a loudspeaker. Then you look at just some of the mouldings and the castings and how it has to be bolted together, and it all starts to that telephone number sort of price tag starts to make a bit more sense.
So yeah, we've got the video up there. Go and check that out. There is Ed's report as well, so go and check that. And all the comments and stuff are on there, so why not add your comments if you went along to the show. If you enjoyed what you saw, if you didn't enjoy what you saw, add that in there as well. And any preferences to what you'd like to see at shows and that kind of thing. It's always interesting to read people's thoughts on, because everybody has their own point of view, and it's always interesting to get the point of view that you never actually thought of, and you think, yeah, you make a lot of sense there. So add your comments to those threads. Right, before we go to games news, we need to talk about the Panasonic European Convention. It was held Monday, Tuesday, which is why we're recording this Wednesday. You get to hear the podcast on Thursday, and lots of interesting things there. I guess the most interesting thing right at the start, Steve, was the fact that Panasonic are now back in the black, and got rid of the plasma line
in more ways than one.
Yeah, got rid of the plasma line, which obviously, they had to take the costs of mothball and all that, but now they seem to be turning a profit in terms of TV. Some of the sales numbers seem to be really quite impressive with that, but they also have hordes of other technology that they're into, such as hair removal.
Yeah, they were referring to obviously as grooming products, which I think is a phrase you can't use that much these days for obvious reasons.
Yeah, but induction hobs and kitchen appliances, and because we're in Frankfurt, seemingly there's a kitchen called a Frankfurt. I never knew that. It shows you how much I know about design, but seemingly that's a big thing in the kitchen world. So they were making a big thing of that at their press conference. So lots of things. I guess we're going to concentrate on the UHD TVs. UHD TVs that start at 40 inches and at £500. Why would you buy a full HD TV now?
It's true. I mean, and I think they know that, because if you looked at the lineup, the majority of TVs are UHD. There are, I think there were 3 series that were full HD, but they were really aimed at, I mean, as they said themselves, these are kind of aimed at second rooms, maybe for a bedroom, or, for a study or for a dining room, whatever. But they're not, if you're buying a new TV right now, you might as well buy a UHD TV, because there's not much of a price differential anymore. And there's definitely a move towards bigger screen sizes. So if you're looking for a bigger screen size, then you'd want than a UHD TV. Obviously, if you buy a smaller screen size, 32 inch, something like that, then you might go full HD. But when you can pick up a 40-inch UHD for £500, you got to say, really, why would you buy a full HD anymore? I mean, I'm not saying there aren't people out there who just I'm not interested in UHD. I don't see a difference, and blah blah blah. But personally, I think by next year you'll be hard put to find a full HD TV on sale anywhere.
What's the scaling like on UHD sets for just kind of full HD material? Very good.
I mean, it depends on the manufacturer. It can vary, obviously, but certainly the ones we've reviewed and from the big names have had excellent scaling. And you can put on a Blu-ray, or a good quality source, good quality full HD source, and you'll be surprised at how good that'll look on a UHD TV. Because if you think about it, they've got more pixels to play with. So they can make you can look at something like that. Almost looks, you almost fool yourself thinking it's 4K sometimes if it's done really well from a really good source.
It's hard to do it badly, Mark. Let's put it that way. It's a lot simpler.
There are.
Yeah, it's a lot simpler though than 576 up to 1080. It's a lot easier to do.
I was going to say, because that's the kind of thing that the arguments that were put around with regards HD ready sets and full HD and the like when people were just watching.
It was more difficult to upscale those kind of resolutions. When you're talking HD to 4K, we're saying 4K. What we should be saying is Ultra HD because it's not actually 4K. Then it's a lot easier to do. And it's the right ratio as well. So there's you're not playing about with different aspect ratios and stuff as well. None of the legacy stuff is going to get in the way. So like I say, it's harder to do it bad than it is to do it correctly.
Yeah, sure. As long as they're not applying a shed load of sharpening to the image and that sort of stuff.
And some of them do.
Yeah, some of them do. But generally you can turn this sort of stuff off or turn it down.
Yeah.
But on the whole, you'll be amazed at how good it can look on a 4K panel. And obviously the other advantage is that what surprised, I think, the manufacturers and definitely surprised the broadcasters is the speed of take-up of 4K TVs or UHD TVs over the last 2 years, to the point now where I think we're going to start seeing 4K content, UHD content, becoming available a lot quicker perhaps than we'd originally considered. So in terms of, obviously we've got streaming already, Netflix, you've got Amazon Prime coming online, you've got YouTube, we're going to get broadcasting soon, and then we've got UHD BD at the end of the year. So we're going to have a lot more UHD content by the end of this year than we possibly thought we would have had a year ago.
A lot of rumours out there as well at the minute, Steve, with BT announcing that they're going to do 4K football.
Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me if Sky try and get ahead of that. And for them to get ahead of that, you'd be looking for something around about April, May, which seems to be the rumour.
Aren't they? So
yeah,
I would be very unsurprised if it wasn't Ultra HD capable. And the BBC also have started talking about UHD, and they wouldn't even have considered it, but for the number of TVs that are being sold now, it's reached a tipping point where now they can discuss publicly the idea of UHD broadcasts, which I don't think would have been even conceivable a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, another big thing that a big talking point, certainly amongst us out there, was the price of these TVs. Obviously, you're looking at 500 quid for a 40-inch 4K. A lot of people are going to say, well, why would you want a 40-inch 4K TV? There's lots of arguments there, but if it's 500 quid and there's an equivalent full HD sitting next to it, I think Joe Public's going to see the bigger number and buy that one, without having it explained to them. But at the other end of the scale, Steve, we were looking at the CX800, which is going to be their flagship TV for the year. Has all the new tech on board, including HDR. And that was coming in at about £3,500 to £4,000. And then we look at the flagship model from Samsung, which you have in at the moment. You've got the pre-production in for review at the moment, and that's going to be £6,000. My first thing is, why would you pay that for an LCD TV?
Well, if you're looking at it from the perspective of Samsung, I guess they're going to say it's our flagship TV, it's a 65-inch, S for whatever that stands for, UHD TV. Their argument will be it's future-proof. It does a wider color space with 92% of DCI. It's got 10-bit video and it's got HDR. It also it's got the One Connect box, which you can swap out if you need to increase processing or change something very easily. And they're saying this is the top of the line television that will last you the next 5 years and manage to keep pace with broadcasting and UHD BD and whatever else comes along. So I guess that's it. I don't think it will stay that price for very long.
How did they get on with the upgrader packs? Because they were doing this upgrader thing, but then they've gone completely silent on that. So what happened with that?
They have been doing them, but I think it's gone more. Well, I suppose some of the stuff, I don't think the new format, the new platform can be upgraded easily, can it, Tyson? Because I think it's not just a question of adding. So
I mean, they're saying, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but they are saying, oh, this TV will last you 5 years. Well, they said that about the one with the upgrading packs, and you've had two models over 2 years.
Yeah, but the thing about the upgrading pack was that was just something you slotted in the back, so that can added a bit more processing, whatever. You couldn't change all the inputs, that sort of stuff. With the One Connect box, you can swap the whole box out and change all the inputs. You could go from HDMI 2.0 to HDMI 2.2, or whatever comes along, and change processing. And this has got octa-core processing too, so it's pretty powerful. I noticed they've had to put a fairly large amount of cooling into this One Connect box now. It makes a lot of noise, which it didn't used to. Well, it didn't used to have cooling before, and it got pretty hot. Now they've obviously had to put in some fans because it's got so much processing power in it. I don't think it will stay at £6,000 for very long because it's a price point that sounds suspiciously like it's similar to the price point that LG have been talking about for their 65-inch 4K OLED. Mm-hmm. We'll see what happens with that as well. But certainly, if you talk to Panasonic, they'll admit that last year they were late to market with a lot of their range, which is, I think, a fair point. Certainly, the AX902 came to market way too late in September. It missed the boat totally by that point. And by their own admission, it was way too expensive. And they obviously don't want to make that mistake twice. So this year, they're going to get them out a lot quicker, and they're going to be at a more competitive price point. And also, and you mentioned them being back in the black, the other bit of black they're back into now is VA panels. Total lineup in the UK is all VA. So you're talking about much better native blacks on their TVs now than they were last year, which I think a lot of people complain about, particularly on the AX902.
I've got to say, because it will be raised and it will be a question, what is it like off axis? Not too bad, actually. For a VA panel, I thought they were...
You could immediately tell they were using VA panels.
Well, you could tell it was a VA panel, but off axis, it wasn't that horrible purple faded out quickly.
On axis,
yeah, really good.
They look bloody good. And particularly the CX802, which is the one that's got a full direct LED backlight with local dimming and the VA panel. I thought that looked very good. I was very impressed with that. Yep. Granted, of course, we're in a brightly lit showroom, so we can't necessarily tell us like we like it at night in the dark. But certainly, my first impressions were very positive on that TV. It looked very good. As you mentioned, HDR compatible. Exactly what kind of HDR? That's another question. I know it's 500 nits. The demo they were doing in a separate area was a prototype that's 1,000 nits. HDR still yet to officially be ratified, although they claimed it was compatible. But
I guess what they were saying, because basically they're caught in the middle here, because it could go one or two ways. What they're saying is they will support whichever one is standardized. And if that means a software update, then they will do a software update. So that's what they were saying about that. And nobody else can second guess this at the minute, because it's still up in the air. So I kind of feel sorry for Samsung and everybody else bringing out TVs, Panasonic and so on, because we don't know what, there were 4 systems up for ratification from the UHD Alliance. It's now down to 3.
Yeah, Technicolor, Dolby Vision and Philips.
Yeah. And we still don't know which one, or if there's all 3 are going to happen or whatever. And I guess it comes down to the age-old argument, Steve. If they all agreed, if they all just forgot about the license fees just for a minute and agreed and ratified a standard, they'll probably all make a nice sum of money through selling this tech, rather than having all these competing,
what they don't want
potentially
to do,
competing systems.
And what they currently are doing is confusing the consumer. Because you've started off with, you've got, as we said earlier on in this
never
podcast,
never mind the bloody consumer. It's confusing me.
Yeah, but you mentioned about it's not 4K, it's UHD, and absolutely right. 4K would be really a cinema standard, and UHD is a name that's been given to the standards being used for TVs and domestic displays. However, you've got for example. Manufacturers are using UHD or Ultra HD. Then you've got along comes Samsung with their SUHD, which is going to confuse people. You've got Sony, who absolutely refuse to use the term UHD and refer to everything as 4K. And then you've got people like Panasonic, who are kind of hedging their bets, and they had UHD 4K on everything. So that's already confusing the consumer. Before we've even got on to HDR or 10-bit video or DCI color space or Rec 2020 or whatever else ends up getting used. And that's the problem. You've got confused consumers. You've got things that might be out of date sooner than they think, or might not be compatible, whichever format becomes popular. I wish they would just sit down, agree everything now, and then move on from there. And the fact that they seem capable of doing that sometimes just staggers belief. You think, well, how dumb are they? When they do it, it works out really well for them, a la DVD. So yeah, it would be good if if they could all agree on something up front, rather than confuse consumers and change standards halfway through and agree stuff later and make certain TVs out of date and before you've even had a chance to really get to use them. But I guess that's the way it goes.
I mean, the latest UHD Alliance thing, there was a list, and it appeared to be that most of the major manufacturers are now on board with that, and most of the studios are as well. It just seems to be Dolby that are hanging on to their system, which you can fully appreciate because they get a license fee out of it. Technicolor want to do their thing, again for a license fee, and Philips want to do their proprietary thing. I guess what they need to do is they need to approach these 3 and say, right, forget about the license fee, let's come up with something that works. That'd be the easiest way of doing it.
Yeah, well, it would be. You think that would be the way to go, but I guess we'll find out. I mean, maybe it's possible that all 3 can be compatible in some way, and therefore they don't necessarily have to choose one or the other, and the TVs can work with all of them, possibly, assuming they've got enough brightness to start with, or it's in the metadata and they can just adjust accordingly. Maybe there's another way around it. But I think what's important is that manufacturers have realised that just adding pixels to the displays isn't enough. They need to add better pixels, I think, as Panasonic was saying. Not just more pixels, but better pixels.
Yeah, it was also encouraging. One of the videos that they ran was about the engineers and the creator's intent, which was really quite an interesting thing. It was a look behind the scenes at, it might even be on YouTube, or we'll do a look. If it is, we'll add it to this podcast, about basically how they go about assessing picture quality, and that it's all about picture quality. And that the interesting thing here, Steve, I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but I certainly did straight away, was the panel is a canvas, and it's what we add on top of that canvas that makes the picture quality. So what they're saying is they're buying in the panels from elsewhere, but it's their electronics at the back of it, and it's their software and so on that's making the picture, and they intend to make the picture as close to the creator's intent. I'm trying to get the wording correct here, is it, because it wasn't director's intent, it was creator's intent. That's what they're aiming for, and they were adding in quite a bit of technology there. There's a new CMS system that's going to be on the TVs this year. It was lookup tables, so better lookup tables. I didn't see if 1886 was on there, did you? I wasn't sure if it was there.
Didn't see that actually. They obviously had the wide colour phosphor, which gives you 98% of DCI colour space.
Well, that was interesting technology, but again, something which they were not going into in any sort of great detail as to how it actually, how they're actually implementing it. But interesting that they're using phosphors. To get the wider colour, and 98% of DCI. Well, that's hands down better than anybody else is doing with quantum dot.
Quantum dot's 92%, so yes, it is. And that's great news, because it means that when they do finally get their acts together and start agreeing some standards for UHD, if DCI is the colour space that's used, and I suspect it will be because it's easier for the studios and it's cheaper, obviously. That means we'll be getting, DCI 10-bit video. We're going to be getting effectively at home pretty much what we're going to be seeing at the cinema, which is, I guess, the dream of any home cinema enthusiast or movie fan at home. And the question then becomes, when you've got the wider color space, the higher bit rate, you've got the increased resolution. Do you need HDR? Is that just thrown in as something, another enticement to consumers? But do we need it? Because certainly the demos we saw, what do you think?
It's crushing the blacks for a start. Completely. And that's been every HDR demo that I've seen, bar the one that Samsung did, where the TVs were actually calibrated by an outside source. They weren't calibrated by Samsung at that demo at CES. And
they were showing a proper film clip.
A proper film clip which had been obviously done for them so they could show off the HDR. It looked stunning, but that's everything else that I've seen HDR-wise. That's Dolby Vision, that's the clips that were being shown at the Panasonic Convention, other stuff that we've seen at CES. Definitely clipping the black level. Definitely. And some of it was just overbright. I mean, when that Netflix logo came on...
it comes to a white screen.
Jesus, blinding. That was blinding.
The idea is that it's meant to highlight little bits in the picture, isn't it? Not be
exactly. It's the highlights in the image and obviously the lower end of the image. That's where HDR can really make a difference. It can pull the shadow detail out, and you can pull the details out of the brightest areas of the image. It's not intended to be super bright in terms of burn your retinas, and that Netflix logo when it popped up.
I'll give you a clue of how bright some of these new TVs are going to be. I've got, as you said, I've got the Samsung in right now. That's got a scale that goes from 0 to 20 in terms of its backlight brightness, and I got it at 4, and it's still pretty bright.
You're not selling these to me. I mean, I just sat here on mute. I confess I'm actually looking at a very smart vintage Porsche, which is going up for auction a bit later on.
Nice to see you paying attention first.
But none of this has me reaching for my wallet.
Well, you see, this is where I was going to wrap up on this, because we're well over time. We need to get to games news and movie news. But this was the final question that I was going to ask Steve, and I'll ask you guys as well. At this exact moment in time, if your TV went bang, would you buy a new TV at the minute? And would you buy one of these new mid to high range HDR jobbies?
I'm the wrong person to ask, because I'd probably beg a television off someone until such time as this matter resolved itself. I'd defer. I'd use reviewer's privilege to defer this decision just now.
Yeah, well,
I mean, I have stood by my claim, however ridiculous it may wind up being. I do not want to replace a plasma television with an LCD television, however clever that might be. So I'm just determined to wait a bit longer, see what we've got, and see where we are. If that meant wandering onto a classified and buying a stopgap, that would possibly be where I'd have to go if I wasn't exercising reviewer's privilege and just stealing a television.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to ask Steve, but Steve swaps his TV every couple of weeks once the new TVs start coming in, so it's probably not relevant. But if you're going to replace the Kuro, Steve, would you at this moment in time?
If I didn't have to, if it didn't go belly up and I absolutely had to get a new TV in, no, I wouldn't. I would definitely wait. I think there's too much uncertainty at the moment. I want them to get the standards all agreed, get TVs all hitting those standards, and guaranteeing a degree of performance that's got 4 or 5 years of life in it. And also, I would wait for another reason. And you were with me. We were looking at Panasonic's prototype 4K OLED, and I'm thinking that looks absolutely gorgeous.
You don't need HDR.
You don't need HDR. I take a 10-bit video, definitely. You get no banding and that sort of stuff. I take the wider color space, so we get what we get in the cinema. The increased resolution, excellent. But HDR, no. Just give me a deep blacks and a beautiful image, and I'll be happy. So yeah, I'd almost certainly. And that applies also. So we're talking about it, AVRs too. Right now, would you buy an AVR at the moment when you got another format coming out in a couple of weeks' time? Tricky. I mean, I know it's difficult to say if you want to buy something or you need something new.
Yeah, don't sit on the fence.
You can't sit on the fence sometimes. You could end up sitting on the fence all the time and never buy anything.
Yeah, exactly.
But this year is definitely a year where there's a lot of great stuff coming down the line, but a lot of uncertainty too.
Yeah, Mark?
I'm afraid I would probably try and find some way to stick with plasma at the moment. It just feels too much like a weird transitional period. This kind of mix of old and new tech. OLED's been seen on the horizon, and I don't know about anyone else, but as soon as someone mentions curved, there's something there that kind of it's like seeing a spoiler on a car that doesn't need it, which just makes you think. You're reaching too much for a selling point to differentiate it from what's come before and what is going to come soon enough. I.e., when you get those 4K OLED screens, no one's going to care whether they're curved or not. You're not going to need a fancy stand to differentiate it. Yeah.
I think that you hit the nail on the head there, Mark. It's certainly. I wouldn't say it's a cynical view. I'd say it's actually probably what is happening, which is that they're trying to get 2 or 3 more years out of LED LCD tech because it gives them more time to develop OLED. And let's face it, there's only one company in the game when it comes to OLED at the minute, and everybody else is scrambling around, putting a brave face on it, putting smiles on it. Yeah, we've got HDR, this is great, and all the rest of it. But they all want to move on to the next thing. It's just nobody's prepared to drop the money to put the lines in and get this tech, because we are talking, you're talking billions of dollars to set up production lines and tool them and all the rest. I mean, Ed, you'll know this better than most of us because you've worked in the industry and that side of things. But to get a new product line up and running, especially something like OLED, and then
especially when nothing has come before along those lines. Yes,
exactly. And then you've got your yields brutal. And all the rest of it. You have to expect to make some pretty big losses before you start to see any gains, and as they all have been in the red for a long time, TV divisions, nobody wants to take the risk.
No, it's not ideal, is it?
So yeah, Mark, I think you hit the nail on the head there, that they've got this technology, they've got these panels, they're not paying a hell of a lot for the technology that they've got in terms of production, because the lines exist, tooling exists, all they're doing is adding on features on top of that. It makes perfect business sense to continue with LED LCD TVs, add HDR in, add wider colour gamuts, add new processing and all the rest of it. It just makes sense. And the unfortunate thing is for TV enthusiasts like our members and so on, who on a daily basis are talking about when can I see a 4K OLED, it's going to be a bit of a longer wait, I think. I don't know if you agree, Steve, but that's certainly the way I see things.
I'm expecting us to have a much better view of what's going to happen by the end of this year. By the time we get to IFA, probably I'd have thought there'll be specs that'll be agreed, standards will be agreed, probably see UHD BD being launched, or at least specs being announced, and possibly being launched ready for Christmas, and hopefully some more news in terms of OLED too. But yeah, that's what you need to do. Wait to the end of this year, and then unless you desperately want to buy a new TV.
Yeah. If your TV goes
fill
pop,
your boots.
Yeah, your TV goes pop, then there's nothing wrong with a full HD TV at the minute. we're not saying don't go buy TVs, but if you're looking for the latest in tech, you're looking for the next sort of Kuro ZT65 sort of level of picture quality, you need to wait, is what we're saying, I think. Anyway, let's move on. Games news next. Okay, let's quickly move on to games news, and Valve have been showing off hardware at GDC, Mark.
Well, that's future tense. They will be. Early March will be the Game Developers Conference, which is kind of a mixture of kind of networking thing and a little expo side. Valve have said, and in quotes, Steam machines with a final Steam controller, new living room devices, and a previously unannounced Steam VR hardware system. So it sounds very much like we will see some kind of a headset from them, because as a company they worked closely with Oculus Rift before the Facebook buyout. Obviously you've got Sony with Project Morpheus, and Microsoft have shown off their Windows HoloLens. So VR and AR is something that it seems like most companies are now looking at if they're serious about future-proofing. Steam machines, obviously that's kind of what people would assume they mean by new living room devices. It's been a kind of stunted growth for them. We've seen from other manufacturers boxes that, broadly speaking, fit the remit of being Steam machines. However, when Valve release their own, it will come with Steam OS, and hopefully that we will be seeing the final controller, which is something it's gone through so many different revisions, and this could be just a key reason why we haven't actually got a Steam machine thus far, which is they want to get this absolutely right, because the control pad is, it's the key to everything with regards trying to get that PC gaming experience on a TV. So that you've got things like big picture mode, you've got all the components there, everything's basically in line, but they've wanted to try and create a controller that can, vaguely speaking, approximate the keyboard and mouse. So, they're using dual track pads rather than analog sticks. I think there are a lot of people who are hoping they don't just simply lump on analog sticks onto this, because originally it was very kind of high-tech sounding, which was no face buttons. It would kind of replicate buttons through haptic feedback and things like that. It had a little color touchscreen, things like this that were kind of superfluous but very cool looking. I think in general everyday usage, perhaps it's just been a little bit too much tech. People do tend to stick by simple things like face buttons and D-pads. But yeah, very much hopeful that we'll see something that's affordable and looks like it can actually compete with consoles. Because if it falls into the in-between category of not offering enough flexibility for the dedicated gaming PC people who would prefer to just build their own system and choose components that way, then it's not going to be a great rival for consoles. Well, the Steam machine, it's just basically, it's going to be just a games PC. That's it. But they're trying to create something in a smaller form factor, something that you can put underneath your TV. And that's really, it's kind of trying to unlock that door, which is it's just a huge market, a huge amount of PC games. You've got things that consoles don't have, which is backwards compatibility with just a massive raft of software titles. You also got a community that's going to update games, and so therefore, whereas people in traditional console generations have to keep on skipping over and saying, well, I'll sell the old console, there's no point having that anymore, and then you're waiting around a couple of years for a library to build on a new machine. PC gamers don't have that trouble, but it's always been the problem of how can you get people putting the machine under their TV and gaming in that manner. Right.
So this is like the games equivalent of a HTPC then? Yeah?
Yes. That's basically what they're going for, which is as well having this Linux-based Steam OS, so they get rid of having to, pay for, an operating system to someone else. It's trying to free up things so that people can just game in comfort with a freer system than consoles offer, but underneath their TVs.
Okay, sounds interesting. We're also a week and a half past the podcast. If people haven't downloaded the Games podcast, why should they go now and download the current Games podcast and listen to it?
Okay, we talked about the Windows 10 announcements, which obviously we covered on the weekly, but we hadn't talked about on the monthly gaming podcast, obviously including the big news about Microsoft's HoloLens. We also got into a bit of discussion about Evolve, new asymmetrical multiplayer game. The review for that is on the site now, and Zelda Majora's Mask, the review for that is on the site as well. And discussing Dying Light and whether really the zombie genre has had its day.
Cool. So if you haven't downloaded that yet, on you go. And coming up next is movie news.
Who's asking the question?
Well, you can ask it if you like.
Is it what's at the movies?
What's at the cinema?
All right. Steve, what's at the cinema?
Well, Mark, last week there were 4 films out. The Wedding Ringer, which I've talked about already on the podcast. There was Project Almanac, which is a found footage time travel movie. There was Predestination, which is another time travel thriller. And also Black Hat, which is a new film from Michael Mann about sort of cyber hacking, which is quite prescient, or well, certainly quite current given what happened to Sony just before Christmas. All the reviews for those 4 films are currently on the site. So if you're interested in going to see those, then go and read the reviews on site. Coming out this week, so on Friday, we've got 2 new films. One, of course, which is It Follows, which I have not seen yet, but hopefully we'll get a chance to see at the weekend. And the other film is Focus, which I have seen. This is the new film starring Will Smith. I think it's his first R-rated movie since doing Bad Boys 2, which I think was over 10 years ago. And it's a film about a bunch of con men, basically. And overall, it's good fun. I enjoyed it. But the thing about con men movies is that if you've seen a bunch of con men films over the years, there aren't that many new tricks in the book, really. I mean, they've got a few new things in this film involving tech, so things like, hacking and card swiping and this kind of stuff. But most of the cons in them are pretty much old school cons. It's basically people lying, a bit of pickpocketing, bit of misdirection, and some sort of sting towards the end. And if you've seen The Sting, one of the things that happens to it at the end is almost a direct lift from The Sting. So, there are no new tricks in the book, really. And if you've seen a few con man movies, you're going to be ahead of the plot. And for most of the film, I was ahead of the plot. I kind of knew what was going to happen and had a rough idea where they were going and what the cons were. But having said that, I enjoyed the film. It's funny in places. It's very exotic. It's shot in New York and in New Orleans and in Buenos Aires. It looks gorgeous. Will Smith is on particularly charming form. I think he is not necessarily the greatest actor, but he's a decent actor. He's a very charming, charismatic personality, and the film definitely relies on that a lot. And also Margot Robbie's in it, who was the wife of Leonardo DiCaprio's character in The Wolf of Wall Street. And again, she's extremely easy on the eye, and it's quite alluring in this film. So on the whole, it's got a charming lead, attractive female lead. It's got a fun plot that's got a few twists and turns out there. You can probably see them coming. It's got some decent laughs. It looks great. And it's it's an easy way to spend an hour and a half in the cinema. I think I gave it a 7 out of 10. And yeah, it's fun. It's nothing. There's nothing in it that's new, frankly, but it's certainly packaged in an attractive, attractive box.
Was that a charming 7 out of 10?
That was a very charmed 7 out of 10. Yes.
And Bad Boys 2 was 2003. So 12.
Yeah, so 12
years ago.
Done a bit of swearing in a movie. I mean, there was a time when Will Smith was the most bankable star in Hollywood. You could open a film on Will Smith's name, definitely. But over the last few years, his star's been a bit tarnished.
He's had a few stinkers. Yeah.
He's had a few bombs. Yeah. And so I think this is a bit of a return to form for him in terms of, it's a good, solid, entertaining film where he's at his most charming. So, and I think it'll probably do well at the box office on that basis. But and certainly, if you fancy going to cinema this weekend, that would probably be my recommendation. I haven't seen It Follows yet, but I've heard that it's a very scary, very good horror.
Are you going to see it?
I'm hoping to see it. Yeah, if it's on a local cinema.
Would you go and see it, Mark?
You know what? I watched the YouTube trailer of it, and mildly scary, but one of the few occasions where YouTube comments are actually worth it. Just for the person who posits the question about what It Follows is, and they just ask, is it an STD?
Well, yeah, it is a bit like that in the trailer, isn't it? I think it's got an awful title, but from the reviews I've seen,
the first question was, is it a fart?
There's no middle ground with YouTube comments, though. They're either literally the most banal thing ever composed with a keyboard, or they're just utterly magnificent. Some time ago, I was watching a YouTube. I think it was a how-to. It was a recipe, and the top comment is, like, if you're viewing this in the reign of King Ramses III in 3600 BC, and I just love the sheer surrealism of that.
Right. We're coming up to the end of the podcast. Blu-rays out next week. Very quickly, Steve.
Yeah, next week we've got Pride, which I saw at cinema. It's excellent. It's about a group of gay and lesbians who try to raise money for striking miners back in the 80s.
Is it in Dolby Atmos?
No, definitely not. It's a superb film, though. Very funny. Really enjoyed it. Very moving. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you do. Mr. Turner, which is the film about the painter, obviously.
Is that in Dolby Atmos?
No. Again, I have not seen that. I do fancy seeing it. It looks very good. Got snubbed a bit at the Oscars, but never mind. Nightcrawler also got snubbed at the Oscars. Jake Gyllenhaal's absolutely superb in it. Brilliant performance from him. Didn't even get a nomination. Very upset about that.
But is it in Dolby Atmos?
No Dolby Atmos. But a really good film. Again, strongly recommend you see that if you get a chance. And finally, The Judge, which I have not seen. Robert Downey Jr. and
Dolby Atmos.
Robert Duvall. Robert Downey Jr. Robert Duvall. No, Robert Duvall as his dad, who's a judge, who's being charged with murder or something like that, and Robert Downey has to defend him. Haven't seen that. It looks okay. The Kaz saw that and is doing the review of the Blu-ray as well, I think. But
so it's another great week for people who have stuck to speakers.
If you've got speakers on your ceiling, next week is not great. However, in 2 weeks' time, Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1 comes out on Blu-ray, and that does have a Dolby Atmos soundtrack. So
there you go. Right. If you're not interested in the Oscars and stuff, and like they say in the news when the football results come up, if you don't want to know the results, blah, 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 leave the room now.
I don't want to know the results. Why are you saving it for next year?
I've taped it.
Yeah.
On VCR.
Yeah. It's one of these things that split the audience straight down the middle, whether people are interested in the Oscars or not. I know I couldn't care less, basically, me. But Steve, you are interested, so who were the quickly winners and losers?
Well, the big winner obviously was Birdman, which won Best Film and Best Director, along with Best Cinematography and Best Original Screenplay. So 4 wins for Birdman. The big loser, therefore, by definition, was Boyhood, which had for a long time been the front runner for Best Film and Best Director. Didn't get either. It only picked up 1 award in the end, which was Best Supporting Actress for Patricia Arquette.
12 years work for that, eh? 12
yeah,
years.
12 years a slave to get nothing. What? That's terrible. I think personally, I haven't seen Birdman, so I really can't comment on whether it deserved to win or not. I thought Boyhood was great, and I thought it was a bit robbed. I think a lot of critics felt the same way, but Birdman certainly does sound interesting in terms of the way it was shot as a single continuous take. The entire film, it's certainly flashy. It's a film about acting with some flashy acting in it, and since the majority of the Academy are old white middle-aged, or old, actually not even middle-aged, old white male actors, that tends to be what gets the win in the end. And that's evidenced by the fact that Selma, the first film ever made about Martin Luther King, got hardly any nominations. Certainly didn't get any nominations in the acting category. Didn't get nominated for Best Film, didn't win obviously, and it did win 1 Oscar for Best Song. Now that's a snub for Selma, if you want my opinion. Worse than that, it's a snub for the Lego Movie, which should have won Best Song for Everything Is Awesome. And didn't even get nominated as Best Animated Movie.
Yeah, but soundtrack and song has a long and distinguished history of being nominated and judged by people who are clearly deaf. I don't mean to be... I don't think I'm being remotely contentious there. Every single year, I hear soundtracks in films, and I think that is that either breaks new ground, or it's it's just a sensational piece of composition, and it doesn't even get nominated. And what wins is normally just utterly indifferent.
You see, this is my whole problem with the Academy Awards. I mean, it is not relevant to today's audience and what people are expecting. It's completely irrelevant now, and doesn't mean anything to me. And I know I'm not alone in that point of view, because I see it more and more and more that people are just getting disillusioned by. And certainly this year, I mean, there was the whole uproar, with the fact that there was hardly any. Well, there wasn't any black actors.
No, I mean, given that there was some great performances this year. I mean, particularly David Adebayo playing Martin Luther King. To not even get a nomination was pretty shocking, frankly. I mean, just to get. But I'm gonna talk about Lego Movie again, because I'm gonna say, they can nominate up to 10 films, and they nominated 8 this year. Lego Movie, in my opinion, since they couldn't nominate it as an animated film because it was live action towards the end of the film, should have been nominated for best film, because I think it is genuinely a masterpiece in terms of what you think is going to be a big long advert for Lego actually is a sort of like satirical, subversive film, anti-capitalist statement. I think, and also really funny and great fun. But so big losers, Boyhood and Lego Movie, and Selma. Big winner, obviously Birdman. Big winner again, Grand Budapest Hotel, won heavily in terms of production design, costume, that sort of stuff, which it thoroughly deserved, actually, because it's a gorgeous-looking movie, as a lot of Wes Anderson's movies are. In the actor categories, everything went as expected. Eddie Redmayne picked up Best Actor for playing Stephen Hawking, so, played disabled, you're guaranteed an Oscar. Julianne Moore...
Wife, just as an aside, I don't know what your thoughts on this, Eve, as you've also seen it. My wife feels he should be taken back off him for Jupiter Rising.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, he should take it back.
They should not only should be you can be nominated, but then literally there's and if you are then also acting something which is truly appalling, that should be counted against you.
I think there's quite a few actors who should be giving their Oscars back. I mean, like Halle Berry has done nothing good since she made Monsters Ball, and really should give it back now and shame. But anyway, Julianne Moore won for Still Alice, playing a woman with Alzheimer's. So again, bit of illness, bit of disability, going to get herself an Oscar. Although, to be honest, in the case of Julianne Moore, she thoroughly deserves it. I mean, just for her body of work. She's been a great actress for a long time.
I'm glad you ended up with of work.
So much.
Best Supporting Actor, J.K. Simmons for Whiplash. Absolutely goddamn right. I mean, he's mesmerising and terrifying in that film in equal measure, and thoroughly deserves that Oscar. And again, an actor who's been doing great work for a long time and finally got some recognition, which I think he deserves. And Best Supporting Actress, Patricia Arquette, as I mentioned earlier, for Boyhood. I mean, you think about it, it's difficult to maintain a performance over 12 years. So if nothing else, she probably deserved that, although you kind of think, what about the rest of the cast? And that's about it for the Oscars.
Well, the rest of the cast lazy if it took them 12 years to finish a film. My God.
Yeah, slack.
Slackers. A lot of them.
Well, Rich Linklater did direct the film Slackers, so I guess there was a clue in his earlier work.
Right, so total irrelevance out the way then. And I think that's about it for the podcast this week. So we have been very heavy on the AV side of things with the Bristol show and then the Panasonic Convention. And we've had to rush through the movies and so on. So apologies if you listen just for the movies and just for Steve's dulcet tones when it comes to...
So in other words, we're apologising to Steve's parents and girlfriend, basically. And the cat.
Oh no, don't bring the cat into it. That's cruel. Right, so let's wrap it up for this week. So my thanks to Steve Withers.
The red log's about to blow.
Mark Botwright.
What idiot dressed you in that outfit?
And Ed Selley.
It'll be a spectacular wreck. Too bad no one will be around to see us.
Don't forget, we're back to Wednesday next week, and you can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and bookmark AVForums.com for latest reviews, news and video. If you want video, it's AVForums.com/video. If it's reviews, it's AVForums.com/reviews. I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and like I say, we'll see you again next Wednesday.